Hey everyone, how's it going? This is Eden of LightCycleAstrology.com, back again with another Mantic Monday episode. Today we're doing episode 42. We'll be taking a look at Mercury's opposition to Pluto this week as part of the week's main astrology that for me stands out and I think is going to offer some interesting energies for the week ahead. We'll take a look at three possible narratives that may go along with this. How do we see a Mercury in opposition to Pluto energy potentially manifesting around us or having an impact on our psychology or something like that? I've come up with three ways that you could think about Mercury in opposition to Pluto for us to notice around us in the week's energy ahead. Before we get into it, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit notifications so you don't miss any videos. Leave some comments in the comment section, and you can find me at LightCycleAstrology.com if you want to check out readings that I offer. Okay, well, before we jump into the three interpretive ways to think about Mercury opposing Pluto, let's take a look at the timing for this opposition this week. So on Monday, Mercury leaves the sign of Cancer and enters Leo and immediately begins to move into that engagement range with Pluto over here in Aquarius. It takes until about Tuesday for this angle to perfect and peak out. And then we're going to see the ripening and at the same time the fading away of this energy by right around late Thursday to early Friday, depending on where you are. So the time frame is between, let's say, Tuesday, although you might notice it a little bit on Monday, but let's just say for sure Tuesday and fading out around, we'll call it Friday-ish. That's when we see this Mercury moving through the opposition with Pluto, and that's when you may notice the energies being present around you. Now, you will notice, though, we are also right around the time that Friday rolls around, we're getting a new moon in the sign of Cancer. So, and I think this is part of the story for the week, astrologically speaking, is the lead up towards this new moon, I think, is almost like a parallel narrative to Mercury in opposition to Pluto. For instance, my teacher, Adam Ellenboss, he used to argue, well, I'm sure he still does. One question is that if you're a student of ancient Western traditional or Hellenistic astrology, you're not using the outer planets to potentially make an interpretation. But of course, many people that practice and are interested in ancient astrology still plug in the outer planets. And they can be used, rather in that case, as almost like shortcuts to an interpretation. So, like for instance, if we weren't using Pluto this week and I just took Pluto out of the chart, how do we see Mercury entering Leo and then somehow having a Pluto-like contact, And one thing that this is actually fascinating to understand is that by all intents and purposes, you actually don't on the surface get a real Mercury-Pluto vibe this week if you just only use the 7 traditional planets, because for one, Mercury has emerged back into visibility. Mercury has gained back her starlight by this point, right? Mercury is far enough away from the sun, has moved out of the metaphorical underworld from being under the beams of the sun and not being visible in the sky. Well, now we see Mercury visible in the sky once more as an evening star, a very beautiful evening star. And Mercury moves into this very bright sign, Leo, that is ruled by the sun, right? The brightest star in the sky is the sun, obviously. So on the surface, you wouldn't interpret in ancient times. I think it would have been very tricky to get the same horoscope for the week, the same read. But then now using the modern outer planets, we get this shorthand shortcut that says, oh, but there's something maybe intense when Mercury moves into Leo, right? There's an opposition to Pluto there. What is that all about? And if you're a practitioner or interested in ancient astrology, one thing you can try to do is to read the chart just using the traditional planets, and can you come up with the same interpretation? Now, my teacher argued that ancient astrologers were practicing a complete form of astrology. It's not that, well, they got close, and then when we discovered these outer planets in the modern time, Okay, now our craft is complete because we have these outer planets. No, in the ancient times, they would have a skilled astrologer could have or would have looked at the 7 traditional planets and seen parallel archetypal themes coming in using those traditional planets. But Pluto here is acting like a real quick, super easy way for us to just jump right there to that interpretation. And we'll get into those in a moment. But I wanted to give you this parallel way to see this without Pluto. And of course, one thing that happens is in order for us to get the same kind of narrative without Pluto, look at how if we jump back before Mercury enters Leo, look at what's happening with the moon. On Monday, the moon makes a conjunction to Mars in Taurus, right? And this is really interesting because the moon in Taurus is exalted. She's lifted up on high. There's something important or fortunate about her, but she also has this contact with this malefic planet Mars that may have some read about, okay, is there something being connected? Is there a kind of fighting or conflict that is happening emotionally or with other people or with family or something like that? There's this very important argument, maybe, as for example, not saying that that will happen, but that could be one read on the moon traveling through Taurus exalted, but making this conjunction to Mars. And another important thing is that the moon is also going through her last quarter phase by this point and soon to enter her dark moon phase, right? When does the moon enter the dark moon phase? The moon enters the dark moon phase as Mercury enters Leo and the moon enters Mercury's sign. So I think that that is a possible parallel way to see that kind of narrative. Now, another thing, just very briefly, is that this week also features Mars and Saturn forming a sextile with one another. So for me, there's a few different clues here that clue us into this intensity that Mercury jumps into Leo. And then there's kind of this intense moment that has this Plutonian-like feel to it. And maybe you're feeling that off of the Mars-Saturn sextile. Maybe you're feeling that as the moon is going through the dying phase, the dark moon phase, traveling through Mercury's sign. You know, there are a few different ways that you may look at that. Maybe you're feeling that because right before Mercury enters Leo, the moon travels by Mars in this exalted-like place. A few ways to look at it. But I just wanted to, I thought that that was interesting to sort of look at it that way. And then we use the shorthand and say, well, at the end of the day, we are using modern planets or incorporating them into the chart. Let's see, how do we get the same kind of narratives? Let's talk about the 3 possible interpretations that you might give some of the archetypal narratives for the week, given that we could see it in the ancient context with using just the ancient traditional 7 planets. And then maybe we just have this shorthand, hey, there's Pluto there in Aquarius. What's going on, right? So the first narrative for me is going to be something like navigating, being flexible and strong. We have Mercury moving into Leo. This is a fixed sign. And, you know, of course, we have the fixed signs that are around the zodiac, right? We have Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius, where Pluto is, and Taurus, where Mars is. So you get the feeling that, you know, we don't have anything in Scorpio, but we have Mars in a fixed sign. We have Pluto in a fixed sign, and now Mercury is moving into one of the 3 out of 4 fixed signs, right? So we get this notion that Mercury being a planet of flexibility, a planet that goes back and forth between evening star and morning star, right? Has this sort of yin and yang where it's like Mercury is outwardly and perhaps thought of as more yang, and then as the morning star, insect with the sun, right? A very yang energy, and then goes through that underworldly transition into becoming an evening star, something that Mercury has just emerged as right now, and is more in that yin. Maybe you could think of it as feminine or yin or nighttime, but it has that more maybe inwardly or social dimension to it. And so that flexibility that is inherent with this planet Mercury is in the mix for sure, making this transition into a fixed sign that has to do with strength, this solar power, the solar dynamic. And it can be also very stubborn and rigid and authoritarian. So I think one narrative, one way that you see Mercury in opposition to Pluto, or take Pluto out, and then you see the energies coming through in the 7 traditional planets as they are moving through the chart this week, is that we're talking about Mercury, a god of flexibility, moving into a fixed sign, and then having relationships to Mars and Taurus as a fixed sign, the place where the moon is exalted, as the moon goes through that dying moon phase, and also Pluto and Aquarius. You get that it's a time possibly for having to navigate both being flexible, but also strong, and knowing how to have that dimension of, this is my autonomy. This is what's important to me. This is my authority. These are my boundaries. All of those kind of ways that we hold true to ourselves, the ways that sometimes we have to navigate through life, and have something rigid about the direction that we're going in. But the problem then becomes with rigidity. If something is too rigid, it can fracture and have an intense break or some kind of breakdown. And we might be seeing a theme that has to do with that, as we get this very flexible planet that normally likes to be fluid, likes to move between things, likes to think about one thing and then switch and think about the opposite. There's this fluidity with Mercury, and it could be that the intensity potentially described by an opposition to Pluto this week has something to do with Mercury moving into that fixed place. Also, on a more subtle level, if you think about Mercury as gaining visibility and moving into this sunny sign, but also a sign where now seasonally the darkness is steadily increasing within this light part of the year, right? Leo is a time, the reason why it's fixed is because there's a steady march towards the fall by this time, right? Leo is situated between the very beginning of summer and the very end of summer. And summer is the bright time of the year where the solar powers are high, but it's also a time that has this inevitable return to darkness, right? It's that much closer. And Virgo deals a lot with the end of summer and the beginning of fall. But in Leo, the question becomes sometimes legacy. I'm in the light now. I'm on the throne now. I'm in power now. But how do I hang on to that? How do I retain that when there's some inevitable metaphorical future that is dark or changing or transformative? How do we bring things into manifestation that last beyond this moment or our own power? How do we transfer things to our children? Those can also be themes that are sort of subtle, I think, but part of the week's navigational narrative, perhaps, around flexibility and strength that may be coming in. Kind of a subtle thing, but I think part of the energy. Okay, number 2 is hidden elements of the soul that appear. Let's look at this from, again, Mercury moving back into visibility as an evening star, gaining back her light, moving into this very visible place. Leo, you think of like the actor on the stage or the actress on the stage, right? In the spotlight, the sun's sign, everything revolving around the sun. And look at me, I'm bright, I'm at the center, everybody watches me. There's this vitality and drama and flair, right, about Mercury in the sun's temple and being so visible and moving into visibility. But Mercury, a psychopompic god that moves in and out of the underworld frequently, making an opposition to Pluto, is for me an indicator that always with the light comes shadow. You know, it's like by very definition, the Platonic, you know, physics of the physical realm that we inhabit is diatomically connected with the dark. So it almost to say the brighter the light, the more intense the shadow is cast somewhere, right? So it may be that as Mercury moves into the light and works again with the visibility, maybe there's some theme around being in the spotlight or having to make your voice known or your opinions known at work or among friends, or maybe there's something important that is really weighing on you. Putting yourself into the light naturally draws shadows somewhere, whether that is psychological shadows that appear because we are putting something in the light for not only others to see, but for ourselves. It becomes more visible to see different, angles of what we do and what we think and all of that. Or it could be that it draws the ire or attention of other people because we are so visible. In other words, the more you become a leader, the more you're at the center, the more you're on the stage, the more you make your opinions, your philosophies, your interpretations, the more you become visible and known, the more you encounter or have to navigate those darker dimensions, where if you stay in the darkness, right, it's almost like you're not provoking karma on some level. So with Mercury merging into Leo, it's like stuff is happening potentially with Mercury representing movement, putting ourselves out there, speaking our minds, saying what is important, maybe voicing our authority, all of those things. But then all of those things sort of move us along our path of karma or something like that, and causes a reaction that may be, metaphorically represented as the darkness of Pluto or the darkness of Leo that is entangled with the seasonal light quality there. So that's one thing that may also be coming in as a narrative, I think, potentially. Okay, now the third thing is, of course, we're talking about finding your roar, right? Leo, the moniker of, this animal, the lion, and you get the sense that Mercury, a god of communication, of messages, of the voice, but also of hearing, is potentially having to wander through the past struggles, pain, denial, the issues of like, how do we find our roar and speak up? Because it's not easy to do that. Those things can often bring up past psychological things. And for me, that's where you get the Mercury in opposition to Pluto, the sort of maybe painful or past psychological things that are buried in there somewhere that may be coming to the surface or needing to come out, because we are putting ourselves into the position of finding the courage to speak or to say something we really need to say, or just the courage to step out there vocally if we need to assert authority or we need to discipline children or whatever it is. The point is that it takes courage to do that. And so it almost reminds me of The Wizard of Oz, where you had the lion and he was always talking about what he wanted out of the deal was to get courage, right? Because he's supposed to be a lion and lions are supposed to be courageous. But, it's very hard to be courageous. And there is a lot of psychological baggage or things that we work with in order to present ourselves as courageous. a very noble quality. So how is it that the mind, or that ideas, or that expressing ideas, or communicating, or things like that, how is it that those things find their way back into the light as they travel through baggage, or fear, or past rejection, or something psychological that it then must go through, like the gauntlet of the scary stuff, in order to be present and in the light? That is potentially a third narrative, I think, that may be quite subtle, but also there. So let me know in the comments what you thought, if you notice any of these. I think that the astrology this week is pretty subtle, but that is what I have for today. Thanks everybody for watching. Let me know in the comments what you thought, and I'll be back again with another Mantic Monday video next week. Until then, hope you guys have a great week, and bye for now.